how can you be that confident? How can you be that assured that you are getting into third year? For me, it was this kind of like, will I get it? You know, kind of thing. What a journey, what a personal journey and an achievement. Do you know?
Yeah.
What a profound thing to go through. Wouldn't change it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? So, of course, I brought this to my supervisor. I brought it to the college. I brought to my own therapist and just looked at this because I was like, what happened to me? What, you know? So in a nutshell.
Welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Expedition. And today I'm talking to counselor and psychotherapist Neil O'Connor. Neil, hello.
Hello, Pavel. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. You are based in Slane and also working in Dublin. But before we get there, I want to start somewhere else. I want to ask you and go back a little bit. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
This is a good question. I was actually thinking about that recently enough myself, preparing for the podcast. But two, you know, a lot of the time with clients, you'll come up against a question of what is meaning, what is purpose for them. So with that in mind, you know, when you're younger, I think you think about what you want to do, and it's an astronaut or a pop star or whatever. Yeah. But there's something in that wish to be a whatever that tells us something about that person. So for me, you know, it would have been things like start off with a vet or, you know, this kind of thing. So when I got a bit older, it was turned into something a bit more real, a bit more realistic, like when it's no longer a childish thing or a childlike thing. I became a speech therapist, and then a nurse, which I did become. I did become a nurse. So there was always a kind of a theme running through it, or a thread running through it of this idea of care and healing and, you know,
helping others.
Precisely. Yeah. And I think, look, that's probably quite a common enough, I think, thing for people who end up doing what we do. There has to be an element of passion in it, an element of naturally the individual themselves. But do you know, it's no one, I think, first of all, no one as a child goes, I want to be a counselor and psychotherapist when I grow up.
Yeah.
Nor does anyone as an adult decide to do it for glory or fame or riches or whatever. You'll do it out of this drive within you for helping others, for facilitating something of healing with others, you know. So, you know, to go back to your question, which is sort of more childlike, maybe, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was always something that involved that. Do you know?
Do you have a memory of like being, I don't know, 5, 8 or 10 when maybe the speech therapist or one of those first ones were there?
Do you know what I do have is a memory of, and it came back to me during my training, and then more recently it's kind of been on my mind as well. When I was a kid, about that age, maybe 6, 7, you know, like you're aware of yourself and you're aware of others, and, you know, more so than when you're younger. So I'd have a sense that when I'm doing something that's kind or good, or what an adult me would use the word compassionate, I would have a physical feeling of a lump in my throat. Like it's kind of a cliched thing. I got a lump in my throat with emotion, but I would have a sense. So it was a signal to me, in a way, this is what I should be doing.
So when you were doing the good
precisely,
deeds.
Like, let's say playing and sharing, playing and, you know, someone was upset and comforting them or whatever it might be. And it was a signal, like a somatic signal. I'm thinking back on it now. When I was young, I wasn't. This is a somatic signal.
Yeah.
But thinking back on it now, and then I would feel it, and it was sort of kind of comforting thing in a way, because like here it is, it's happening now. And then for a long time, I suppose for different reasons, it left me. I wasn't feeling that anymore. Like maybe in teenage years, not because I wasn't kind or not because I wasn't, you know, anything like that, but I think there was a lot more happening that I was working through at the time as well. So it wasn't as simplistic.
Went into a background, but it was probably somewhere they were not fully
precisely, or present. maybe I wasn't at that time feeling sort of it's a big word, but safe, comfortable,
Yeah.
you know, within myself, within my body, that this would happen to. Do you know? But it came back to me as a memory and then as a feeling during my training. I have a kind of a sense of it now, like it's like an echo or a memory of it now as we talk about it, because it does come when I talk about it, when I become aware of it, you know. But that's my memory linked to that idea of I want to be a. Do you know that you can kind of take that thing that was happening, this signal, and in effect make a career of it?
Yeah.
Do you know this kind of way that you can? That's what I'm here for, in a kind of a grand way, in a kind of a, you know, that's what I'm meant to be doing, the best thing I can do.
So you feel connected through this,
precisely,
with the work that you do.
Precisely, like you would feel of the time I have. This is my best use. This is the best meaning and purpose I can take from. Do you know from this time I have and
even you saying it now sounds like you dropped a little bit because you connected with something that.
Well, precisely, yeah. You know, and it's this. It kind of comes down here through your core, and you know, absolutely. It's funny too that I would talk so much like that somatically, and you know, kind of work a bit like that too, because one of the first things that I came across, one of the first challenges I came across in college was that immediately they, you know, the lecturers, the tutors, the whatever, identified that I had a disconnect between here and here. So I was living, and I think actually that goes back, I've just realized that goes back to that loss of this thing that happened to me in my teenage years, my adolescence, because I did retreat up into my head where it was safer and...
Which is common for men, but also for trauma.
Well, sure. Yeah. Well, precisely. Yeah. You know, you could reassure yourself up here, but not feel much.
Not feel.
Do you know? Yeah. So then I arrived into college, you know, and I identified, I mean, it was probably written all over me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now, having made that connection again and reestablished it, and, do you know, you can begin to feel that again and feel proud of it and feel, you know, wow, this is what that was. Do you know? That kind of thing.
And you are owning your story with that.
Precisely. Yeah. And my physical self, you know, my body, do you know, inhabiting me kind of a thing, you know.
And we might be getting into that moment when you were working on it in your college. But I'm so curious, that younger you, right, 5 or 8, I don't know how old he was. He would not know that at that time. He wouldn't connect all the dots.
No.
So how did he get to, what was his journey to becoming a therapist, or even thinking about, well, will I apply for a course?
I think there was a period after school, so, you know, 17, 18, 19, there or thereabouts. And I sort of drifted a bit because I didn't have a full sense really of that thing I'm talking about now, where I can step into this idea of who you are, who I am, who, you know. And so, you know, I did different courses and I did different jobs and sort of just bided my time a bit. And I would always say, oh, you know, if I went to university, I would do this, that and the other thing. Or, oh, when I go to university. You know?
Okay.
So then, as I say, I ended up as a nurse. I did my nursing degree. Worked for a short time as a nurse. And there is an unofficial and presumed counselling role in nursing, where people will open up, people will talk, because you have a bit of time with the patient, not a huge amount, but you have that bit and they can talk to you and they can open up or say something to you that they might not say to the doctor. They might not have time to say to the doctor. They might not have, or they might be scared of their own mortality or their illness or their whatever, their prognosis. So you do get that piece where you're listening and attending to the person that way. But there wasn't enough of it, or it wasn't an official, concrete, formal part of this role. So it's just, there's something dissatisfying about that. And then you're filling out paperwork for hours and you're like, oh, you know,
Right.
he asked me about that, or she asked me about that, or she wanted to say something to me, but now I don't have time because I have to do all this. So I worked as a nurse in London for a short time.
In London?
Yeah, I was in Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children because I'd done a dual degree of children's nursing and general nursing together. So I ended up in Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital for a short time. And after I left the nursing field, I ended up still in England, in the northwest of England, working for a suicide prevention charity for a while, which was, again, we're kind of stepping closer and closer to this mental health, trauma, healing, attending, peace, holding people's pain, holding, being with them.
Yeah.
So then, having kind of worked in that job and worked in that field, then I moved, that was in England. So I moved back to Ireland, and then it was, there was a period for in my 20s and into my 30s when I would say, if I could go back to college, I would become a counsellor. If I had the time, if I had the money, if I had the whatever, I would become a counsellor. And then eventually, just one day, my mother just said, why don't you? There was a level of support there that was, emotional, family support.
Yeah.
Do it. Great. And equally financial support. So very lucky that way. Very fortunate. But it was like, do it. I'll help you.
Was this the last job that kind of helped you to make that step?
Yeah, I think so. That moment, yes.
Yeah.
I do think it would have happened. Am I flattering myself a little that it would have? I think it would have happened because it sort of, it was, I had a sense that that's it. That's the dream. That's the best thing I can do. That's
the goal in a way.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the, there isn't anything I'd rather do.
Yeah.
That kind of feeling. But in that moment, I was like, God, let's do this. So did the research, chose the course, dived in, feet first, in Dublin, and never looked back. During my nursing degree, I had written a literature review on LGBT adolescent suicide and self-harm.
Was there materials for this, or
Yeah, a lot. Okay. In fact, one of the kind of points that stood out and that I really remember even now was that for decades, and in every continent, in almost every cultural, any kind of strata of society you choose for any period, any decade, for as far back as I could find research, we're talking back to the 70s, that these adolescents, this group of adolescents, were more prone to thoughts of attempts at and dying by suicide. And equally more prone to self-harm. So there was this, what started for me with the lit review as something of a question. Oh, what's the difference? Is there a difference? Do you know, what will I find out? And I mean, it was just evidence stacked up upon evidence. So there was, the kind of the research question, or the lit review question, so to speak, was what is that reality of that statistical gap? Why is there a reality of that stark of a gap? And what can nurses do about it? Because of course this was a nursing degree, so what can nurses, and healthcare workers, because you would find research on doctors, nurses, hospitals, mental health, psychiatric care, STD clinics, lots and lots of stuff for all of this cohort. So the advice would absolutely apply to nursing, So that's, and I myself and one of my classmates both approached the Trinity Students' Medical Journal with the eye to publish, and there was the back and forth of editing and re-editing and cutting down and, this format and that format. And then eventually we both were accepted for this journal at the end of the journey. And it was a really lovely kind of bookend to the whole process, rather than, which involves a lit review, but much more so than just a lit review and then presenting, this is what the literature says. That's the first step. This is what the literature says. Now what? So yeah, I suppose then to pick up from that point of, that support from my parents, from my family, and you start in the course, and a little like the nursing degree too. I've done 2 degrees so far, but there's a pattern where I think it's going to be one thing and then it turns out to be something else.
Right. So what did you think? So, what are you kind of doing the research about the courses, finding the one in DBS? What do you think it's going to be? I
think more so, the course is the course. So, you're going to be in classes and doing essays and learning about Freud or whoever, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. But I think more so it was the presumption or the naivety for me was more about myself. Like, oh, I know myself. I know how to do this stuff. I know, I'm sure. Do you know this kind of way?
Yeah.
Like,
and I was very much in the same boat.
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah. And that's probably quite common, I think, too. You're naturally, you're kind of, well, this is what I'll be doing on the course and whatever. Now, it wasn't a radical change where I was, oh my goodness, I don't know myself at all and I have to deconstruct everything and, something like that. But certainly, like, as an example that I gave earlier, where that day one, they were like, you're disconnected from your body. And I was like, no, I'm not, So there's that kind of level of, oh, I thought it would be different.
Yeah.
And it's challenging to the self and to the, it's challenging too, I think, on every level.
Yeah.
Do you know?
And maybe also the part where it's not about how many books you've read and how ready you are for exams. It's like,
sure.
Oh, it's about me. It's about how I am, how I work, how
Absolutely.
I feel, how I perceive.
Yeah.
How do I go about changing that?
Absolutely, yeah. How I connect to another person, how I connect with a group, how I connect with myself, how I can be sufficiently grounded to facilitate another person connecting to themselves when I can't, I'm struggling to do that, So for the first, year or two, you're sort of batted about, from one class to another or from one tutor to another, or, you have all these experiential classes that you've never come across before.
Yeah.
You don't do it when you become an architect or an engineer or even a doctor or a nurse. Actually, well, I can't speak for doctors, but when you become a nurse, you don't have this, who are you really, sort of thing. You're just like, now you're a nurse, go on ahead, So that's a shock to the system.
How did you deal with that little by little? Like, I can imagine maybe the first year could have been challenging, being like, what do I do?
I think you just, it's necessary and you won't survive if you don't. But if you just roll with the punches, do you know? They tell you you're disconnected from your body. And if you stay with the, no, I'm not, then you won't get into the next year. You won't get into third year. You won't sit in front of a client. You won't, if you just kind of go, no, you can be obstinate about it.
Just to kind of be point out, in some way, somebody could hear you saying it, that it sounds very judgy, being like, oh, you're disconnected. But it is very well done in really well professional manners, where you have like a reviews that people are trying to help you to get to the finishing line, which is finishing the course.
And look, they, whether you like it or not, they're usually right.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
They're there for a reason.
Precisely. That can be, there is an inevitable sort of ego wound there where you go, oh, you know, I wanted to be, you know, I wanted to be, you're really good at this, you know, like from the, you know, from the outset.
I wanted to be acknowledged.
Sure.
Especially for you having the experience as working as a nurse.
Yeah.
And you would come across people where you did sit there with them and listen to their story.
I did. And that wasn't, you know, dismissed or not acknowledged, but equally the challenge, I think, is kind of like, look, this is not like what you've done before. You're dealing with something at a much deeper level. If we haven't done this thing that does require us to be knocked off balance and then recalibrate ourselves and, you know, regulate that back for ourselves, then we're ready to sit in front of someone who's chaotic or vulnerable or internally a little out of whack, you know, and then we can, do you know?
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is that, you know, the first rule of therapy is do no harm. And you potentially, or not you, but anybody who maybe would keep on that attitude of like, oh no, I don't need to change, I'm great the way I am, will potentially cause harm.
100%. One of the things that I carried with me, an idea that is still with me, and I think it's very, very important, from the nursing degree, from the children's nursing piece. You know, you have classes, lectures that try to prepare you for trauma and abuse.
In the nursing course?
In the nursing course. In the children's piece. This is children first, child protection, you know. And one of the things that they say, which is true, is that in order to work with abuse effectively, you have to accept that it is real, that it's happening. Not naturally, not condoning it, but you have to accept that it is. You can't resist it within yourself or go, no, not in Ireland, not in this hospital, not in...
Oh no, she's fine. That's what happened to me as well, or that's what happened to my grandmother. That's what happens to kids, right? And obviously I haven't done that course, so I'm just trying to follow.
100%. You can't dismiss, downplay, avoid, deny. So then in this course and in this work, you have to, in order to do no harm, I think you have to first accept your potential to do it, to do harm, and address that. And not go, sure, I wouldn't do harm.
Yeah.
How could I? And then you possibly will, because you're unaware or whatever, you know. So if you have this sense of yourself as in that autonomy that we talk about, or in that power that we have, we do absolutely have a potential.
Yeah.
But recognizing it and accepting it and not judging it within ourselves, but being aware of it, then we can move forward.
Would you remember any kind of like a stepping stones in the course where you were coming across this in you? Like how do I change myself basically in a way, or what steps do I have to go through to?
Yeah. There's elements of the course, you know, like process group, for example.
Yeah. I'm only now laughing because the previous video we just seen that we were talking about process group. So it's coming up a lot.
Absolutely. And I mean, your previous interviewee, your previous guest, Jacinta and I were on this course together.
Yeah.
So we shared that space, you know.
Were you in her little group, or were you in a separate group?
No,
you were literally in her class and also in the group.
In class, in the group, we share our surname.
Yes.
And we would sit together and we would always say, we're not related. You know, we're not married, we're not related, we're not brother and sister or whatever. But the things like process group, which are so unusual, you do not come across that in any other area of your life.
Let me just tell us, what is process group? How would you describe it?
Very, very good point. Very good point. So process group is ultimately a module on the course, which you do for 2 years, the first 2 years, wherein the goal, I think...
I can just see the wheels turning before you say it, because it's so hard to describe, isn't it?
It is. And I think I'm gonna caveat what I say by going, this is what I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that kind of way?
Yeah.
Because really, for every process group and every person in one, there are that many interpretations of what it is, you know?
Yeah.
Ultimately, to my mind, it's an exercise in learning about yourself, learning who and how you are in groups, and a kind of a dual or maybe even more than that mode of increasing your awareness.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of how I, you know, we had a group facilitator. So you have your group of your cohort, and then you have somebody whose job it is to facilitate. You know,
well, let's really use this, because this is...
What does that mean?
They're facilitating in a really different way
100%.
than a regular facilitator would facilitate.
100%. You know, our one, I think, looking back now, while at the beginning, I think for all of us, it was incredibly challenging. He would stay apart from the group, and whenever he gave us a feedback or, you know, threw something into the group to kind of get things moving or whatever, he would look up at the corner of the ceiling. So he was never addressing anybody. He would never look at you or me or whoever and go, the group isn't connecting to each other. And like this accusatory stare.
Yeah.
He would look up into the corner and say, the group is avoiding talking about themselves, and just these kind of slightly
random,
abstract notions. The group is circling or whatever, and we'd be, you know, like kind of for a while it's very disorientating, because no one does that, you know, and because you're sitting in a circle in a group, you kind of think, oh, this is like group therapy. This is lovely. This is a lovely space.
First 2 weeks before this idea leaves your mind forever and never comes back.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, this incredibly challenging,
and
nerve-wracking, and its own way, safely, but boundary pushing, and this kind of can be a traumatic thing. Do you know? But as I say, you are knocked off your own kind of balance. You know, your pendulum is swinging over and back wildly, and then.
And you're trying to hold it somewhere, catch it here and catch it there.
Precisely.
And it has so much power, it just swings you left and right.
And then there's 14 or 10 or whatever people in the room all doing the same thing. And everyone's chaotic. And do you know what I mean? But you get to this, certainly when you're finished it and you go, I'm done. I never have to do process group again. Yeah. And it was my experience, I think, and maybe one or two others, where you kind of go, I miss aspects of it, you know. This kind of, you have this very strange relationship then,
because now you would handle it so differently.
Absolutely.
And now you would maybe find that benefit of it much easier than we could have even imagined at that time.
Yeah, because you're just so shocked by it.
Yeah,
in the beginning, and you have all these thoughts. I chose to be here. Like what are they doing? You know,
why am I spending that time?
Exactly.
Surely we could have a different module to actually learn about like academic.
Precisely, learn about whoever.
But
Pavlov,
it is so powerful
you know?
to be in it, because it only lasts 2 years.
Sure.
But then afterwards it's replaced with the placement itself. So you are going from this environment into, hi, how are you? What's the story with you? Just holding on to the seat.
Absolutely, yeah. Do you know? And at the moment now, I have one or two clients who are themselves trainee therapists.
Wonderful.
And they are in their group process. And sometimes it just comes screaming back to me as they talk about it. You know, you get this kind of flashback where you're like, ooh, you know, this, I wouldn't, while at the time, I cannot say I enjoyed every moment of it. I didn't, but I wouldn't change it now.
Yeah, the same.
Do you know?
Same. Yeah.
This experience that you have that's unlike any other, but sets you up, I think, for this career, this job, that in its best, when you're really working best, it's not like any other.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You learn as you go along about what this can be if you do it well, if you do it right, and
If
you
you
connect
engage
with precisely.
with that. Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
What a great position to be in. What a great thing to do with your time, you know.
As you're talking now, I'm thinking, did you have an experience when you're going through this, right? The first or second year, and then you're telling your friends or your parents who were so supportive and who kind of maybe encouraged you to do the course, did you maybe try to explain to them what's happening in the course? And was somebody being like, that's a very strange course? It's hard to explain. It's hard to
It is.
Yeah.
I sometimes have clients who comment that they wouldn't talk to their family or friends about the work that we're doing because it would take so long to explain.
Right.
So it's a little bit like that, in that you could sit down with your friends over a drink, or you could sit down with your family over dinner, or you could sit down with someone who's known you your whole life or whatever, and you could start going, well, it's not really that, it's more this. No, it's not this, it's more the other thing. And they'd be kind of, what? Yeah. What's happening? You know, so there's a context to it. You know, for example, myself and Jacinta or other friends in college would have, you know, you bond with them and you kind of roll around in this odd course together, and they get it because they're with you, and you know,
there's some bonding there because they have shared experience.
Absolutely,
with you. You don't have to explain.
Often in the same room, and
often in the same room.
Do you know? So it's not as though, you know, my the people who were in my life, friends and family, you know, like I was started speaking a different language to them or something all of a sudden. It wasn't that level of like, what is he on about? It was more, you'd have to tell them. It would take too long to explain.
It would take too long.
You know, even here with you, you know, you've gone through it.
Yeah.
So I can speak a kind of a common language, or I can speak a, you know, I'll be understood by you. Do you know? Whereas, and I think too, you know, when you're talking to your people in the outside world, so to speak, about the course or whatever, you filter it a bit too.
Yeah.
Do you know? And equally, neither are you going to say, oh, I was in process group and I learned this thing about myself and it connects back to when I was 7 and this happened. And they'd be like, oh my God, do you know, like, what, do you know? So you protect yourself too, and you kind of go, oh yeah, great time in college, you know, you know, very interesting, you know, or whatever, and do it that way.
And then from second year, you're in the third year, which changes quite a lot in the course that you've done.
It does. Each, as you well know, you know, preaching to the choir here, but each year, at the end of each semester, you have this kind of professional suitability,
Assessment.
you know, meeting where they kind of say, yeah, we're happy for you to continue. And, you know, and in our first year, we met some of the then second years going into third year. And in that leap from the end of second year to the start of third year, the college is basically saying to you, yes, you can continue to placement, sit with a real client. You're out there doing experiential learning, but you're really working now, you know.
Were you worried about that kind of threshold being like,
yes.
Will I be allowed? Because I was.
Absolutely. So this second year that I met was just very like, oh no, I know I'm going to be like, I know I'm going to get into third year. I know I'm going to be sitting for the client. I know I'm going to be fine. And I was just, how can you be that confident? How can you be that assured that you are getting into third year? For me, it was this kind of like, will I get it? You know, kind of thing.
It's like a little like a award, almost like
like a big one, like
passing.
a big. Do you know
what's the word? Passing a trial or no? Or like,
well, precisely, yeah. Or you see, too, though, it's not like, and you know, you might like the nursing degree or whatever. You know, you do your essays. You've learned how to care for a wound. There's one way to do it. You write that down. Well done. You got good marks for writing down most of how you care for this wound. But with this degree, it's more like, are you ready? Are you able? Are you at the point where we, the cottage, trust you to sit in front of these vulnerable clients. And you go, what does that mean? Like, what you can't prepare for it by reading a book.
Because we haven't done that yet. So somebody's deciding like, well, can you do the job you're trying to learn?
Yes.
But you've never done.
Yeah.
But we'll let you know if you can do it.
And there's no like, this is what we're basing it on. If you know these 5 things, then you'll get through. It's more, and you kind of...
It is very much what you said. It's very much like, because there is no like a 5 points, like, okay, run
which
100
anyone
meters
can do,
in 8 seconds, train on bench lift, right? No, you can't. Like,
there's an element of it that is so connected to the self and who you are, that if you don't, I think that was what my surprise was with this older student, further along student, that if it isn't a bit of a anxiety provoking thing, am I good enough?
Yeah.
Will I get it? Then it surprised me that I was, oh goodness, what a level of self-assurance, self-knowledge, whatever it was. Now, look, there's every chance that student was covering for anxiety and going, oh, I'm fine, whatever. But I don't think so. It felt authentic when she was just, yep, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm going to get through. And she did. She was right. So like, she wasn't wrong. But yeah, like again, you don't sit down halfway through your nursing degree or whatever, and they go, can you be a nurse? Or
we don't think you can do that.
Absolutely.
That doesn't happen.
We've thought about it and thought about you, who you are in here.
Yeah.
And you can't be a nurse yet. And you're like, like there's nothing like that. It's just, great, go on ahead. Yeah. For better or worse. What a journey, what a personal journey and an achievement.
Yeah.
What a profound thing to go through. Wouldn't change it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't change it.
And then when you were allowed, you were
sure.
The green,
like,
green light.
What's the word? Approved or, kind of
approved. Yeah.
Approved, I think. Yeah. So then I, found my first placement, which was, people talk about, their first session, their first hour. Yeah. Later in my career, I ended up working with students who were entering into that phase. And, I would have been part of interviewing and recruiting these students for their first client hours and their placement and having part of that support role. You find your placement and you go into this room, you look around and go, okay, this is where I'll be seeing the client. And in my particular room, when I went in first, there was an odd mix of, there was some kind of religious or faith iconography, a crucifix or that kind of thing. But equally then, there was these odd little statues of one, there was 2. One was a witch, with the hat and the warts and everything, on a dolphin, riding on a dolphin in the ocean. And another one was a witch, the same kind of, cackling, on a Harley Davidson. So it was an odd mix of, it's not the occult, but you know what I mean? It's sort of, and then this stuff. So I bundled everything into a drawer.
Okay.
I was like, no. And I left out a wooden boat. Because I thought, look,
That's
it's something.
Boat,
it's a little generic. It's a little bit vague.
Yeah.
But equally it's about journeying and travel and freedom and, but also risk and all, those kind of things. So it's a nice little symbol. And I left that on the windowsill. And once I had done that piece of, as I say, bundling the unwanted stuff into a drawer, then I felt a calm sort of settle over me. This in terms of this kind of, now I'm kind of, I had a bit of a mastery over the room itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I still didn't know what was going to come through the door.
Yeah.
But that much at least, the room then became in essence mine for that hour, Whether that, lent a great deal or not to my very first sessions with that first client or clients. But overall it was really a positive and affirming experience. You know, naturally you come across a challenge and you have your supervisor and you go to them and go, well, what'll I do? You know.
Did it remind you the nursing days a little bit?
I'm going to say no, in that it didn't remind me of it, but I certainly had learned and picked up on stuff from then that I was bringing in with me as part of my arsenal, as part of another thing to bolster me, or to, you know, like that kind of thing. I think anyone who comes to this career will, generally speaking, have had life experience and career experience of a different kind. And everything I find is a transferable skill. Mm-hmm. You know, we have people in that role I was in, where I was supporting, you know, you'd have people who might have worked. I remember one student worked in Marks and Spencer for her entire life, you know, from early age to this point, and she was, you know, like middle-aged and working with people, dealing with them, with emotions, dealing with time management, there's so many transferable skills into this career, you know. So I brought a lot of that nursing stuff with me. It was again, wouldn't change a thing. And I kind of, you know, I think that's starting now to kind of, like, I'm probably going to keep saying that throughout the day, because I really wouldn't, you know, even, you know, I've thought about, gosh, if I'd waited another year or gone a year before, I wouldn't have met Jacinta. Yeah. I wouldn't probably have met you. I wouldn't, you know, and things keep rolling on, and every decision you've made leads to this moment instead of another.
And your placement was for 2 years, so year 3 and 4.
Yeah, so you're in third year and fourth year, building up a number of hours of experience to be signed off, and, you know, get your parchment, get your degree, whatever. So in that time and in that, you know, period of the training in this placement, my very first client, my very first hour, was a young man from that particular suburb of Dublin where you know, where the placement was in, with a trade, dealing with, I'm going to be as circumspect as I can, you know, for confidentiality, but dealing with a grief that a young parent would deal with. So, you know, him and his wife were dealing with this grief, and looking back now, and I can name what happened now, because I looked at it and I know how to name it now and how to talk about it now, because it snowballed into my thesis. But this very early client experience was that in his grief, he brought out in me a counter-transference.
How would you describe counter-transference, somebody who doesn't know what that means?
Pardon me. Very good. So, in a nutshell, a transference is anything within the client that is inspired by the therapist. So it could be, you know, a feeling, a connection with another person in their life, a previous relationship that is brought into the room via how they feel about their therapist. Counter-transference is similarly what's inspired in the therapist by what the client is bringing in. That's painted with a very broad
There's a whole
brush
essay
now.
of 2,000 words
we could talk
on these two two names.
Yeah.
You know,
more information is available.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Google it.
But in any case, so I had what I now call a maternal countertransference. So to explain what that is, that this young client in his grief brought up and out of me a feeling of warmth, compassion, love, care, that this is what he needed. This is what this man needs. And as that arose in me, I felt a fear piece accompany it, outpace it, and pull it back. So it something within me said, "Oh, don't do that. Don't go there." And I felt the connection between me and him break. Now he was as far as I could tell, largely unaware. He was, continued in his piece.
As it happens often.
Precisely.
Happens
he was, in wherever he was in his headspace. Precisely. Yeah. But I was aware of the break and then a need to come back into the room and attend to him again, So, of course, I brought this to my supervisor. I brought it to the college. I brought to my own therapist and just looked at this because I was like, what happened to me? What, So in a nutshell, my own internalized stuff, internalized fears from growing up LGBT came up out of me and took over. Mm-hmm. I thought, if I show care, compassion, softness, warmth, maternal countertransference, as it's called, if I show this to this client, I will get an adverse reaction. He will become angry. He will become aggressive. He will judge me. And I thought to myself, well, first of all, will he? Because that was the first question that your supervisor, your therapist will ask. How do you know that will happen? Yeah. So you look at your previous experiences. You look at what that's based on. It's not based on nothing. Yeah. It's not irrational, But I thought, okay, so that happened to me. It must be happening to other people as well, other therapists. But, and equally, I'm kind of skipping over a very big piece of work that I did on looking at why that happened to me and how I could address it and, what it inspired. It's like, the client opened a door for me to walk through. Yeah. And within going through that door is a huge piece of learning. It's up to you to do that, to walk through it. Or you could go, nope, and close the door, because you're too scared or whatever. So, and again, skipping a big piece, a big chunk of time. When this happened again with the same client, I allowed it to come into the room because that's what he needed. And he responded
Was it difficult for you? Because you almost now saying, I allowed it, but there must have been a huge amount of...
This is what I mean when I say there's a big piece of work that I'm kind of going, this happened, and then this is,
Because I can't imagine 1 week you...
Oh, no. It wasn't, wasn't a week later. No, certainly not. No. It wasn't. It was, and you're still working with this client and kind of facilitating his grief or whatever. But no, it certainly wasn't within a week. But when I eventually was able, with the same client, it was a medium to long-term piece of work. When I was eventually then able to allow this to come up and out of me into the room.
And hold it.
He responded beautifully. That was exactly what he needed. And there's something too, if you think about it, something intuitive about that. Grief. He needs compassion, non-judgment, care. Of course he does.
Yeah.
Do you know? But all of this other stuff got in the way.
And I wonder now, because you're almost saying, and you don't have to say the whole thing, but you're saying when you reached out after that while of personal learning, he responded wonderfully. How did you then respond back? Because that's the completion of the healing cycle for both of you.
Is, yeah. And you're absolutely right. And I suppose in that context, the response, where that lands or sits for him is, I'm attending to him.
Yeah.
When it comes back to me, I can certainly feel or begin to feel that healing. I can certainly begin to feel that was the right thing to do. And all this work I've been putting into this question of what happened to me, now it's, and it builds a confidence and it builds you kind of go, oh, okay,
And then the whole thing might have been for you the first time you have experienced the whole thing of reaching out with that compassion and thing, and then not receiving the rejection and the words.
This anticipated response. Yeah.
Yeah. So it probably was a new journey, new kind of destination for you.
It was, and I want to do a huge, again, caveat, a huge asterisk in that and say it absolutely was, but it was almost nothing to do with him. He did not
Oh no, I get that part.
It was
I get
all
that part.
internalized, but I think it bears repeating and it bears reminding anyone listening of that idea that this was a huge piece for me.
Yeah.
Do you know, this internalized thing? I'm laboring that point in part because, so as I say, I think this must have happened to other therapists, other LGBT therapists specifically, who have a client base where some of this stuff will come up.
Yeah.
You can't escape it. You can't, it's not possible. And actually one of the pieces of literature that I came across made that point very clear, is that it's practically impossible. It is impossible to grow up LGBT and escape this particular kind of oppression. It was a case that it was going to have happened to others. I just needed to find out how and why and explore that. So that became my thesis. You know, the impact of internalized stuff, you know, on the LGBTQ plus therapist, and the impact on the work, the impact on
the therapy space.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for anyone who is thinking of doing the course, doing a thesis, or preparing to do their thesis, huge piece of advice. I always say it to everybody: choose something about which you are passionate.
Yeah.
That you are connected to, you know, not in an unhealed way, because then you'll just kind of run into trouble.
Yeah.
But connected to in a way that's especially interesting to you. And it will make the work, because it is a big piece of work, it will make it 10 times easier, because you want to get back to that.
You want to find out.
Laptop. You want to
the
Google.
curiosity.
You want to, precisely.
And you were like, well, I had this experience, then let me find out how other people or how the research is looking at this.
Yeah. Do you know? So I found then, you know, there was tons and tons and tons and tons of research about the LGBT client in therapy, not a huge amount about the LGBT therapist.
That was my next question, because I was also thinking, when you approached the college, being like, this is my, it is quite like a special, not special, maybe it's quite unique.
Yeah, sure.
You know, a title for thesis, right? So when you approached them, were they okay with that, or it took a while to persuade them?
There was certainly no resistance. I think too, because of where my idea had come from, what had, you know, the genesis of this idea, that lent itself to my supervisor being interested and being, oh, you know, it evolved kind of organically, you know. So I got very lucky with this particular supervisor who was, you know, herself had done a doctorate. She had done research, you know, to these levels, you know, that I can only at this stage kind of fantasize about, you know. But she was so competent and reassuring and supportive, you know. I had this great experience with her, really. But it equally too, I think that in bringing the idea and my own passion for it, my own, this is mine, this is me, that, you know, probably for her would be hard to go, no, you know, and be a bit churlish about it, and, you know. But I think, thankfully enough, it was interesting. It was worth the question, worth the research, worth the time. And it's nice to know that, nice to hear that and go, yep, you do that question. Do you know?
Did you feel supported by her, kind of?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. You know, there were periods where I worked at it for hours in a day, and I would send her a question or two, or, do you know, and just find my way and feel my way. And yeah, very, very much supported, very much, you know, like cared for in her role. Because you sometimes you hear these horror stories of, I haven't heard from my supervisor for weeks, and my supervisor won't take a draft, and my supervisor
won't answer an email,
or, you know, and you're like, goodness, do you know?
And before you, obviously there was a lot of work that you had to interview therapists, find them first, they interview and put the whole thing together. when you had the idea, I want to do this type of thesis, did you kind of expect what you're going to find? The findings at the end? Did you expect that that's going to be the results at the end?
No. I'm going to say no. And I think that should be the answer to anyone who was asked that question about their research.
So did you think, because if you maybe say again, like what your research basically was, if maybe the way how I'm understanding it, LGBTQI plus therapists, do they have a internalized homophobia, and is it affecting the relationship with the clients? Is it...
Yeah.
Maybe you say it the way how you...
On that level, do they have it? Does it affect their work? Yes. If I had come across someone who went, no, that itself would have been, okay, that's probably worthy of its own thesis then. Mm-hmm. And I would wager that you'd dig a little deeper and find actually that, yeah, it did, you know. I knew that some of those questions would have a yes answer. Uh-huh. Yes, it exists, as an example. But to what extent? And my particular methodology for looking at that data, so IPA, I'm going to try and pronounce the full words. Interpretative phenomenological analysis. Hey, I did it. Yeah. Try saying that 5 times quickly, you know. But it lends itself to an attempt to make sense of how the interviewee makes sense of what they're talking about. So they give you their take, their interpretation, their narrative, and you interpret that. And you look at what's gone before, the literature, and you work with it and immerse yourself in this rich story, you know. In that case, then no, I didn't know, I couldn't have known where it was going to go, but I was always going to be fascinated with what I found and where I went. And, you know, there's this lovely phrase that I found it somewhere. I mean, most of the stuff that you see online is inane, but you sometimes come across just a little speck of gold. And one of them was, when you start upon the path reveals itself.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
You know, so what a lovely kind of freeing thing to give to a client too, because then they don't feel the responsibility of, oh, am I doing this right? Am I doing therapy right? Am I saying what he needs to hear? Am I talking about the right thing? So with all of the interviews, I had that sense of, we will start on this research path. I'm interviewing you, but where we end up, do you know?
Yeah.
So it was you get this lovely rich data from that. You get these lovely felt experiences, you know. And
probably also the connection with the
absolutely
interviewees who are therapists in
absolutely. And my inclusion criteria, so the things that you know and you state that you need, you have inclusion criteria. They must be this, or you might have some exclusion. They cannot be that.
Yeah.
So they had to be working for a certain period, certain number of years, so we would have meaningful data. They had to be self-identified as LGBT. I think it's fairly straightforward, really. But I think that was it. There was no exclusion criteria. I didn't have to say they can't be this, they can't be that.
Do you have like an IACP? They must have been like IACP accredited, maybe.
Yeah, I suppose because they, you know what, you're absolutely right. Yes, they were accredited, and because they had been working for a certain period of time in order so that they would have enough time to look back on, then that accreditation was usually
there,
built in. Yeah, it was precisely, you know. So yeah, absolutely accredited therapists. So, you know, you've got this kind of then cohort of people who, right, now we've got something to look at. Yeah. Now we've got these, you know, and we start off on this journey. It was a lovely piece too, you know, to kind of bookend the beginning of my third year, where you were all of a sudden on this playing field where, well, you're a therapist now, you're a trainee, but this person that you're sitting in front of, you're their therapist.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't pretend, or this isn't a fishbowl. This isn't a fishbowl being
10 minutes or 15 minutes. Like, this is like
in college when you're playing a role of, well, you're the therapist, I'm the client, and there's someone watching and taking notes. This is real. So, you know, you have this third year start where I had this experience of this countertransference and this, internalized fear that came up for me, to finishing a thesis and working. I mean, talk about healing, finishing this big piece of work. And then having been published in the Trinity Students' Medical Journal for my nursing degree, I thought, could I do that again? Could I, So anyone who's thinking about doing that, I ended up overshooting in hugely. So I found this journal online, and it was an American journal, and it was something like the American Journal of Incredibly Important and Complicated Science, or something along those lines. I can't remember what it was called, but I mean, it was like, finishing school and then applying for a job in the president's office or something. It was like, walk before you can run. So they wrote back and went, thanks, but no, and I was like, but then I thought, of course, goodness, like, you've got the IACP journal. Why don't I try them, And they accepted it and they published it. And it was this, again, this kind of, wow, like this, it's a thing I think that people don't think they can do until they do it. It's lovely, Again, that journey of healing, and a journey from a particularly difficult experience. I think I spoke about it earlier in a kind of this happened. So then I talked to my supervisor, and then I went back the next week and everything was fine, and it wasn't. This was difficult, and then the IACP gave me the Research Excellence Award for that year.
Congratulations.
Thank you for that piece of work. So again, just a sort of a lovely reminder, a lovely emblem of that level of looking at myself and working on something uncomfortable. Yeah.
And then when you look at the findings from your thesis, right, does it inform you how you are now with clients? Was it because you said you didn't expect to find what you found?
Yes. So, yeah.
Was that a picture, or was that a moment being like, well, okay, there is some level of internalized homophobia, and it's in those therapy rooms, but I don't want to work that way. I want to work differently.
Yes. And I suppose, whether the client is LGBT or not, you're going to come across something of this in your work. You're going to experience something of a judgment of self. So what the big teaching I took from it, I think, is that stuff, I'm not bound by it. I'm not trapped by it. I'm not trapped in it. If something like that comes up for me again, it is possible for me to work through it. Mm-hmm. So I needn't go, oh, I am this kind of person or this kind of therapist and limit myself. Mm-hmm. It absolutely helps with work with an LGBT client, and I have a few, but equally it will absolutely help with work with a similar client who brings up something within me where I go, oh, he reminds me of something from, my school days, my, growing up in the 80s and 90s in the northwest of Ireland. Not the best, not the worst, but you bring things about bullying with you, and you bring things about being whatever you might be, tall and quiet and studious and LGBT and all these things and wearing glasses. I used to wear glasses, and you bring all this stuff through, and you go, oh, this is who I am, and So I think if you can work on that stuff and recognize and sit with it and heal from that, great. Mm-hmm.
So Neil, it looks like throughout the course, was there a moment when you kind of knew you wanted to, have your own practice and be a therapist? Or was it like from the beginning when your mom, before even the course, told you, why don't you try? Was this all the way there with you?
I think yes. I'm going to say yes. in that a part of that sort of naivety that I talked about where, I'll do this course, I'll become a therapist, I will, there was a part of that was like not looking at a pragmatic piece of how will I find clients? Where will I work? How much will I charge? What will I do if they don't show up? Tons of questions that eventually come to you while you're training. But I did have a sense of, yes, this will be my full-time job. This will be my career. I don't want to do anything else. And while I was doing the degree, I worked full-time in a job in what you would roughly call finance. It was an entry-level job, but in a financial piece. And it was kind of, it acted as a control of sorts where I was like, well, I don't want to be doing this, So,
right. So like a motivation being like, I want to finish this course.
Absolutely. It tells you what you don't want as well as what you do. So at the end of the course, and as I came to the end of the degree, and as I was, building up the required hours, I was working in a particular place where, the clients were being given to me, and I was able to take on 10, 12, thereabouts. So at the end of that period, and when that quite a big number, 450 hours of practice needs to be accumulated, that kind of rolled along nicely for me.
But that's nice.
I was very lucky.
Walk out of a placement with 10.
With this,
12 clients,
so working there, and then, to kind of cut a very long story short, I ended up working there with another, maybe like, let's say between 18 clients, there or thereabouts, right? Let's just, kind of simplify things. And when I ended up leaving there, a lot of them came with me because they were medium to long term anyway. There was no possibility or no real practicality to them starting again, nor did they wish to, they would have come with me. And I think starting out working as self-employed, working in private practice, I understand that that's, bringing this cohort with you from your previous job, your previous place is very fortunate. And now, having said that, a lot of them are still with me. So there's a piece there where, the clients, I met them via a job, but I kept them via my work. And they are still with me via my work. So, you kind of, it was actually Jacinta, who we both know, who reminded me of exactly that. It's like, you did that. You didn't win these clients in a raffle or whatever, you know what I mean? You built that work. So I was grateful, to her for reminding me of that. But it was, I think it was as smooth a transition from the course and learning to working full time as I might have wanted.
Oh, that's nice. Sounds nice. Not everybody has that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It wasn't without its own speed bumps along the way, but it did translate into, at the very end, a cohort of clients that I could establish and work with and keep. And, some of them have come and gone and new people have replaced them and all that kind of stuff. That's how it all came to an end. The course and the new piece began for me with that transition.
And before we leave your college years behind in this interview, I want to come back to one of those points you mentioned in your first or second year about being taught about the disconnect, right? So was there a moment, let's say, when you, maybe at the end of the third year, you in your kind of practice, you have in your clients, you have your group supervision, were they maybe acknowledging one of your strengths or some of the strengths in the college, how you maybe build something up that wasn't there before?
Yeah, I think, they say these things to you. Let's say if we take my example, which is the disconnect in first year, within the first couple of weeks between being all up here, being all, retreating up into my head where there's no or not much emotion, and being disconnected from what's happening in your body. And they say that to you in first year, and they are watching you for, did he hear us? Yeah. Did he accept it? Did he take it on board? Did he
implement it at
all? So then, and I was also very lucky, I think, to have the therapist I did at the time, who did a lot of that particular kind of work with me. I would have, of course, said to her, "Oh, they said this to me in college," or whatever. But equally, she would have seen that too. I wasn't, "Oh, did they?" That's news to her. She'd be like, "Yeah," Yeah. So she had this lovely way of saying to me, she would, I'd be talking about something like I am now, like, "Oh, and when I was in school, this happened," or whatever. And she would say, "Stay with that for a moment." And then she'd point to her awareness, so to speak, her conscious awareness, say, "Drop down into your body for me." And she'd do this several, and now I resisted because I was like, no, yeah, I can't really feel anything. Anyway, as I was saying, and I kind of want to move on because I didn't want to drop down into this thing that I didn't really know and unknown territory, But she would say, just drop down for me, And I do that now with my clients. I mean, I think if you don't mimic something of a really good therapist that you're lucky to have, then you're missing out, because like some of that stuff is just really, it's so rich, So she did that. She insisted. It was this lovely therapeutic challenge.
She held you accountable.
Absolutely.
To your own.
Absolutely. Wouldn't process. Allow me to just go, no, and move on or whatever. By the time I got to 4th year and still working with her, I was doing this so much more naturally, so much more easily, and knowing what it was that it meant to do that. So then knowing and practicing and doing so much of it with her, I could then facilitate another person in doing it. So if I spoke about my client and I said, I asked the client what was going on for them, and I do this thing about pointing to my head, then the lecturer would be like, he learned something in the last 4 years, So yeah, there was definitely it was funny, like in those interviews in 3rd year, especially going into 3rd year, and then at the end when they say, "Yes, we have signed off on you, to this," their piece in the interviews was very much, "We've signed you off, and of course we have, because this," and mine was like, "You've signed me off," because there was definitely this, that they were having one experience in that meeting, and I was having another one.
I think we have to kind of in some way catch up with their point of view on us.
Absolutely.
And the first 2 years is like, well, you know much more about me than I do.
Yeah.
So I have to work on that. Yeah. But then you get better, especially with clients, and they think you're doing really well, and you're like, "Do you think I'm doing well?"
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So even at the end,
I need to catch up with this one as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even at the end, you have this experience of, "Oh my God, I didn't know that."
Yeah.
You're not going in going, "So I'm great, haven't I?" or whatever, and waiting for them to go, "Yes, you are." And everyone pats each other on the back or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, it was a lovely, again, that, and for anyone thinking about doing the course or going on that journey, do it, become a therapist.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would tell people who are thinking, who are maybe now listening and saying like, "Wow, that sounds like a ordeal to go through"?
It is.
But you are saying go and do it.
100%. It is an ordeal. The kind of, the sort of, trust the process.
Yeah.
Embrace the journey, blah, blah, blah. Every journey starts at one step or whatever. Jump into the ordeal and do it. Do you know what I mean? Just it's don't go in thinking it won't be, like I did. Understand that it will be, but enjoy it. Like just I mean, God, how easy is it for me to say that though to you? Oh, didn't we enjoy it? No, it was really quite difficult at times. But I think like therapy itself, and the client who maybe 6 months in or 4 months in will kind of laugh at themselves the way they were at the beginning.
Yes.
Or at some point, and I've had this a few times, maybe 6 or 7 weeks in, or thereabouts, they will say, "Oh, I was looking forward to coming today." Or if I wasn't available, "Oh, I missed this last week when I wasn't here." Whereas at the beginning they were like, no, what do you want to talk about that for? Or whatever,
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. Like, oh, you stop asking me about myself,
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, then they're kind of like wanting to be there and knocking the door down to get in, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? And there's this lovely change over the course. You will feel a change within yourself over that course, and then into your career. And
then even your journey through the college professors, right, lecturers, it reminds me how therapy is. It reminds me that sometimes we are telling people, yes, you can do it. You actually are fine. You actually are looking after yourself. You are doing really well. And they're like, am I? Yeah. And then they are catching up on how well they are doing maybe after 6-8 months.
Absolutely. And equally, for the client who maybe some of them have never heard that before.
Yeah.
And at first they kind of look at you and go, but like, you're just saying that, or anyone would say that, or, and you go, no, look at what happened in the first few months. Look at what's happening now. Yeah. Look at that response you just had to this person.
Yeah.
You weren't like that 6 months ago or whatever, or 2 years ago, whenever it was. And they go, oh, they sort of start to believe in themselves, and what a lovely thing, what a profound thing to be a part of.
And before we close up this session, sorry about that.
Drop down into your body. Yeah.
Before we close out this interview, and before we film the next interview, also with Neil, about how he works, I want to ask you, if somebody is listening now and is really interested and would love to work with you, how can they find you?
So probably the easiest way to find me would be Neil O'Connor Counselling. I mean, how straightforward is that? Is my business name. So just Google that. You'll find the business details. I work in Dublin 15. I also work in Slane in County Meath, little village there. And Slane Counselling Centre, which is in the heart of the village, has its own website where I have my picture, my little spiel about myself, and you can click to contact me, and I get an email with your inquiry or whatever. So just, have a look on, there's a Facebook page, there's an Instagram page, just Google it and you'll find me on there. And equally, if you're interested in my research or want to cite it or want, a bit more detail, reach out. I'm always happy to help someone who is doing something like that and kind of wants to ask a question or whatever. So find me.
That's all for today. And if you want to listen to how Neil actually works with clients, listen to the next episode.
Perfect. Great.
Wow.
I think, do you know what I mean? You do it out of this. Sorry. Maybe I'm more nervous than I thought. Pardon me.
Don't worry, it's fine.
Do you think I've been smoking all morning or something?
I can see you in the car, like.
Yeah, absolutely, all the way. It's chain smoking. Yeah. One of the pieces that
I'll just pause it there, because the whole camera is like, yeah. Don't worry, we have plenty of time. Yeah, are you okay so far?
Perfect. Yeah. It's going.
That's great. It's great. Yeah.